The gunshot split the night like thunder. In the flickering light of a campfire, Ranger Jake Morgan's weathered face revealed no emotion as the outlaw dropped to his knees, clutching his shoulder. The Colt single-action army in Jake's hand still smoked, its ivory grip worn smooth from 15 years of service. At 45, Jake had put more men in the ground than most had shaken hands with, but he took no pleasure in it. Justice was simply a job that needed doing. "Next one goes between your eyes," Jake said, his voice low and graveled by years of trail dust. "Those immigrants you were fixing to rob are under my protection." The year was 1875. The war had been over for a decade, but its ghosts still haunted the frontier. Jake Morgan carried those ghosts with him, along with the scars from Antietam that crisscrossed his back and the memories of brothers fallen under Confederate fire. The Homestead Act had brought waves of hopeful settlers west, and with them came the vultures, outlaws, corrupt officials, and men who developed a taste for violence during the war and couldn't let it go. Jake bound the outlaw's hands and secured him to a wagon wheel. Dawn would find them in Redemption Creek, where a jail cell waited. The settlers huddled nearby, wide-eyed children and exhausted parents who'd risked everything for the promise of land. Jake didn't smile at their thanks. He simply nodded, checked his Winchester repeating rifle, and took first watch. Redemption Creek rose from the dust, like most frontier towns, a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a saloon doing better business than the church, and the promise of civilization hanging by a thread. Jake rode in with the morning sun at his back, the captured outlaw slung over a pack horse. That's when he saw her. A crowd had gathered in the town square. At its center stood a young woman, no more than 23, her wrists bound with rope. Her face was bruised, her simple dress torn and dirty, but her eyes blazed with defiance. Sheriff Roy Harlow towered over her, a man whose reputation had traveled as far as the Texas Ranger outposts where Jake occasionally reported. Former Confederate officer, known for his cruelty, suspected of a dozen crimes but too powerful locally to touch. "This is what happens to thieves and liars in my town," Harlow bellowed, yanking the woman's dark hair. "Tomorrow at noon, we'll shave her head bare in front of God and everyone. Let her carry that shame wherever she runs to." Jake's hand instinctively moved to his holster. Public humiliation, shaving a woman's head, was a punishment from darker times. He'd seen it during the war, in villages where suspected informants were punished. The memory made his jaw clench. The woman raised her chin despite her trembling lips. "I'm no thief. You're the one who murdered my father for his map." Jake's interest sharpened. He dismounted slowly, tying his horse to a hitching post. Something about the set of the woman's shoulders, the fire in her eyes despite her circumstance, stirred something long dormant in him. "Take her back to the cell," Harlow ordered his deputies. "Make sure she's pretty for tomorrow's festivities." As they dragged her away, the woman's gaze locked with Jake's for just an instant. But it was enough for him to see the scar, a small crescent-shaped mark beneath her right eye, identical to the one his sister had carried. His sister, Emma, murdered 12 years ago in a Confederate raid, led by a lieutenant known for collecting souvenirs from his victims. A lieutenant named Roy Harlow. Jake had come to Redemption Creek to deliver an outlaw. Now, he had a different mission. Sheriff Harlow's office smelled of cheap whiskey and gun oil. Jake pushed the captured outlaw forward. "Caught him robbing immigrants on the Westland Trail," Jake said, dropping a wanted poster on the desk. $200 bounty from Judge Parker's court. Harlow barely glanced up from his ledger. "You Rangers sure love playing hero to every foreigner with a wagon." "Law doesn't care where a man's from," Jake replied, "only what he does." Jake studied the office while a deputy processed the paperwork. 3 Winchester rifles behind the desk, a shotgun within Harlow's reach. 4 deputies, all wearing Remington revolvers, cheaper than Colts but deadly at close range, and a steel door leading to the cells, where the woman was being held. "That girl," Jake said casually, accepting his bounty payment. "What'd she steal?" Harlow's eyes narrowed. Nothing that concerns a passing ranger. "Just curious about a head shaving. Seems medieval for a modern town." "This town follows my justice," Harlow snapped. "That girl's father was a prospector who stole from me. She knows where he hid what's mine." "Must be valuable," Jake observed, counting his money deliberately slowly. "Valuable enough to die for if anyone interferes," Harlow replied, his hand resting near his holster. Jake nodded, tucked away his payment, and left without another word. But he'd seen what he needed: the cell key hanging on a hook by the deputy's desk, the rear window with its rusted bars, and the schedule showing only one guard on night duty. The sun was setting by the time Jake positioned himself in the alley behind the jailhouse, his Colt loaded and a bundle of dynamite sticks, salvaged from a mining camp months ago, secured in his saddlebag. Sometimes justice needed more than a badge. Sometimes it needed fire. The explosion rocked the jailhouse just after midnight. Not enough to destroy the building, but enough to create chaos and cover. Through the smoke and confusion, Jake moved like a shadow, dropping 2 deputies with precise blows before they could draw. The night guard never saw the rifle butt that rendered him unconscious. Jake found her huddled in the corner of her cell, eyes wide with fear, until recognition dawned. "You're the ranger from the square," she whispered. "Jake Morgan," he said, working the lock with a picked key. "We need to move fast." "I'm Sarah Williams," she said, rising unsteadily. "Why are you helping me?" Jake saw his sister in her eyes, not just the scar, but the determination. "Harlow's justice isn't justice at all, and I've got questions about your father's map." Sarah stiffened. "The map leads to Confederate gold. My father found it before Harlow murdered him. It belongs to the people, not a killer." Shouts echoed from the street. Jake handed Sarah his backup revolver, a snub-nosed Colt Lightning he'd carried since Appomattox. "Ever fired one of these?" he asked. She checked the cylinder with practiced ease. "My father didn't raise a helpless daughter." They slipped through the smoke and darkness to where Jake's horse waited, a sturdy Mustang that could carry double when needed. As they mounted, gunshots erupted from the jailhouse. "Ride low and hold tight," Jake ordered, spurring the horse forward just as Sheriff Harlow emerged from the smoke, roaring orders to his men. The night swallowed them as Redemption Creek fell away behind, but Jake knew the pursuit wouldn't be far behind. A man like Harlow wouldn't let go of gold or revenge. Rain lashed at them like tiny whips as thunder rolled across the sky. Their horse struggled through mud that sucked at its hooves, threatening to trap them in the open. Sarah clung to Jake's back, her strength failing after hours of hard riding. "We need shelter," Jake shouted over the storm's fury. He spotted an outcropping of rock that formed a shallow cave. It wasn't much, but it would shield them from the worst of the deluge. Jake helped Sarah dismount, her body trembling from cold and exhaustion. Inside the meager shelter, Jake worked with practiced efficiency. From his saddlebags, he produced a wax leather pouch containing dry tinder and flint. Within minutes, a small fire pushed back the darkness, its flames dancing shadows across the rock walls. "You've done this before," Sarah observed, huddling closer to the warmth. Jake removed his duster and draped it over her shoulders. 5 years with the Rangers, 12 before that with the Union Cavalry, you learn to stay alive. He examined her wounds in the firelight, a split lip, bruising along her jaw. Nothing broken, but evidence of Harlow's brutality. "Why would he shave your head?" Jake asked, offering her jerky from his provisions. "Seems personal." Sarah's fingers traced the scar beneath her eye. "It is. My mother defied him years ago. He shaved her head before running her out of town. Now he wants to do the same to me. And the gold? 20,000 in Confederate coins, meant for paying troops that never received it. My father found it buried near an old mission. He wanted to turn it over to the federal treasury." Her voice hardened. "Harlow got to him first." Jake stared into the fire. The rain hammered outside, a natural barrier against pursuit, but morning would bring clear skies and determined hunters. "There's a Comanche camp 2 days' ride from here," he said finally. "Chief Red Hog owes me a debt. We'll find sanctuary there while I send word to the federal marshal." Sarah studied him in the flickering light. "You're not just after the gold. What did Harlow do to you?" Jake's fingers instinctively touched the faded photograph he carried, his sister smiling, the crescent scar visible beneath her eye. During the war, Harlow led a raid on a civilian settlement, said they were Union sympathizers. His voice grew cold as winter iron. My sister was teaching school there. Harlow's men killed everyone, took souvenirs from the bodies, ears, fingers, eyes. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness. The scar, she whispered. You saw my scar and thought. My sister had the same mark, born with it, our mother said, shaped like the moon. The fire crackled between them as a silent understanding passed. Both haunted by the same man, both seeking more than gold, seeking justice that the law alone couldn't provide. Dawn broke with surprising clarity after the storm. They rode hard through terrain that grew increasingly rugged, Jake choosing paths that would confound pursuers and leave minimal tracks. By midday, they had crossed into territory few white men ventured, Comanche hunting grounds. Will they welcome us? Sarah asked, eyeing the distant mesas with apprehension. Respect is a language all warriors understand, Jake replied. I saved Red Hawk's son from rangers who didn't bother to distinguish between hostile and peaceful bands. They crested a rise, and Jake raised his hand in greeting to the mounted figure watching them from the ridge opposite, a Comanche scout who had likely been tracking them for miles. The scout approached cautiously, his weathered face revealing nothing. Ha, Jake who rides alone, the man said in heavily accented English. You bring trouble to our camps again? Trouble follows me, Stone Knife, Jake answered in the Comanche tongue. I seek Red Hawk's counsel and remember his hospitality. Stone Knife assessed Sarah with sharp eyes before nodding once. Follow. The old man will want to hear what brings his white brother back to these hills. The Comanche camp appeared unchanged from Jake's last visit 3 years earlier. Lodges arranged in a protective circle, women tending fires, children playing games of skill that would serve them as warriors and hunters. But Jake noted fewer horses, fewer young men. The reservation system was slowly strangling even the proudest tribes. Red Hawk waited outside the largest lodge, his face deeply lined but his posture unbending. At 70, he remained a formidable presence. The ranger returns, Red Hawk said, switching to English for Sarah's benefit, with a woman who carries fear and anger in equal measure. Jake dismounted and approached with proper respect, waiting for permission before speaking. We seek shelter from a corrupt lawman, Jake explained. One day, maybe two, I would not bring danger to your people. Red Hawk gestured for them to enter his lodge. Inside, away from prying eyes, Jake explained their situation in greater detail. Sarah revealed the location of her father's map, sewn into the hem of her dress, and showed it to the old chief. This man, Harlow, Red Hawk said thoughtfully, he is known to us. His men shoot our hunters who venture near the border stones. They say we trespass on white man's land that was ours for generations. He's no friend to any people, Jake assured him, Indian or white. Red Hawk studied the crude map. This place, he pointed to an X near a drawing of 3 peaks, lies in bad lands. Spirits dwell there. Our people avoid it. Perfect place to hide gold, Jake murmured. Their discussion was interrupted by a commotion outside. Stone Knife entered without ceremony, his expression grave. Rider approaches. White man, alone, carries the star of a lawman. Jake's hand moved to his Colt. Harlow? No, young man. Says he knows you. Jake, who rides alone, says he brings warning. Jake and Sarah exchanged glances before following Stone Knife outside. A dust-covered rider had been surrounded by Comanche warriors, his hands raised non-threateningly. Jake recognized him immediately. Thomas Reed, a young deputy from a neighboring county. Morgan, Reed called, relief flooding his face. Thank God you're here. Harlow's got a posse of 20 men riding this way, professional manhunters with Sharps rifles. Jake approached cautiously. How'd you find us, Reed? And why warn us? Reed dismounted slowly, aware of the arrows aimed at his heart. I'm not what you think, Morgan. Been working for Judge Parker and the federal marshals for 8 months, building a case against Harlow. Weapons trafficking, mostly. Selling army repeaters to outlaws. He produced a leather wallet with a federal badge. Miss Williams' testimony about the murder of her father could break Harlow's grip on the county, but we need to get her to Fort Smith alive. Jake's instincts warred with caution. He'd known Reed passingly for years, a quiet, efficient lawman without Harlow's cruel streak. But trust came hard on the frontier. "If you're lying," Jake said softly, "I'll kill you myself." Reed nodded, understanding completely. "Fair enough, but we need to move. Harlow's not just after gold anymore. He wants both your heads." They departed the Comanche camp before sunset, Reed leading them along a hidden trail that would take them to Silverton, a 3-day ride where a federal judge held court twice monthly. Red Hawk provided fresh horses and supplies, extracting only one promise from Jake, that Harlow would never threaten his people again. The trail narrowed as they entered a canyon, high walls of red rock rising on either side. Jake felt the hairs on his neck rise. Perfect place for an ambush. "Reed," he called softly, "how many people knew you were working for the marshals?" Reed hesitated, then cursed. "Just Judge Parker and Marshal Collins, and—" The first shot echoed like a cannon in the confined space. Reed's horse screamed, rearing as blood blossomed on its flank. More shots followed, bullets spitting rock splinters as they struck the canyon walls. "Ambush!" Jake shouted, dragging his rifle from its scabbard. "Off the horses! Use them as cover!" Sarah was already moving, diving behind a boulder with the lightning revolver ready. Jake returned fire at muzzle flashes on the canyon rim, counting at least 5 shooters. Reed crawled to Jake's position, blood soaking his left sleeve. "Harlow must have a source in the marshal's office," he gasped. "No other explanation." "Save your strength," Jake ordered, reloading his rifle. "Sarah, can you make it to that outcropping?" She nodded, face pale but determined. "Cover me." Jake lay down, suppressing fire as Sarah dashed between boulders, making it safely to higher ground. From there, she picked off a shooter with remarkable accuracy. "Your father taught you well," Jake called. He said, "Aim small, miss small," she replied, chambering another round. The firefight continued as shadows lengthened. Reed grew weaker, his breathing labored as blood pooled beneath him. Jake knew the deputy wouldn't last until morning without medical attention. "Morgan," Reed wheezed, fumbling inside his shirt, "take this." He pressed a small leather case into Jake's hand. Inside was a federal marshal's badge and documentation. "Judge Parker signed it 2 days ago. You're officially a deputy U.S. Marshal now. Get her to Silverton." Jake stared at the badge. "Reed, I'm no lawman. Not anymore. You're exactly what Harlow fears most." Reed coughed. "A man with authority and a conscience." His eyes closed for the final time as the canyon went suddenly, eerily quiet. Jake pocketed the badge and surveyed their situation. 2 dead horses, 1 dead deputy, limited ammunition, and somewhere above, Harlow's killers waiting for darkness. "We need to move before night falls completely," Jake told Sarah as she joined him. "They'll rush us in the dark." Sarah knelt beside Reed's body. "He died trying to help us." "And we'll make sure it wasn't for nothing." Jake retrieved additional ammunition from Reed's gun belt. "There's a narrow side passage about 50 yards ahead. It leads to higher ground, if we can reach it." "Jake," Sarah interrupted, her voice strange. "Before we go, there's something you should know." She withdrew a folded paper from her bodice. "This was with my father's map. It's a letter proving Harlow sold information to both sides during the war. Union troop movements to the Confederates, Confederate supply routes to the Union." Jake unfolded the yellowed paper, recognizing official War Department letterhead. Names, dates, payments, all documented in damning detail. "He's not just a murderer and a thief," Sarah whispered. "He's a traitor who profited from the deaths of soldiers on both sides." Jake felt cold fury settle in his chest. "Harlow didn't just raid that settlement where my sister died. He sold its location to Confederate irregulars, knowing they'd attack." He carefully refolded the document and returned it to Sarah. If we die here, this dies with us. We need to reach Silverton." "No," Sarah replied, surprising him. "We're not running anymore. Redemption Creek needs redemption. Your sister, my father, all of Harlow's victims, they deserve justice delivered right to his door." Jake studied her face in the fading light. "What are you suggesting?" "That we stop playing prey," Sarah said, checking her revolver, "and become the hunters." 3 days later, Sheriff Roy Harlow stood on the porch of his office, watching his town with the satisfaction of a man who owned everything he surveyed. Behind him, Deputy Evan Pike shifted nervously. "Still no word from the manhunters?" Harlow demanded. "No, sir. They should have reported back by now." Harlow spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Double the guards tonight. Something doesn't feel right." The town of Redemption Creek had grown tense in the days following Sarah Williams' escape. Rumors spread that Ranger Jake Morgan was involved, a man whose reputation inspired fear even among hardened frontiersmen. As twilight descended, Harlow retired to the saloon he owned, drinking whiskey at his private table while the working girls kept their distance. His hand occasionally brushed the revolver at his hip, a gesture of reassurance that had become more frequent lately. He never noticed the stranger who entered wearing a duster and wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Never saw him signal to various men scattered throughout the establishment. Never suspected anything until the stranger approached his table and placed a badge on the scarred wood surface. "Roy Harlow," Jake Morgan said, pushing back his hat. "By the authority of the United States government, you're under arrest for murder, treason, and enough other crimes to hang you 10 times over." Harlow's shock lasted only a moment before his hand darted for his weapon. He never cleared leather. Jake's Colt appeared as if by magic, its barrel inches from Harlow's forehead. "That would be a mistake," Jake said softly. "One I'd enjoy correcting." Around the room, Sarah and men from neighboring farms, many with personal grievances against Harlow, had drawn weapons on the sheriff's few supporters. Outside, the sound of gunfire indicated the battle for the jailhouse was already underway. "You can't arrest me in my own town, Morgan," Harlow snarled. "These people won't stand for it." "These people," Jake replied, "are standing with me." The saloon doors burst open as townspeople filed in, their faces set with determination. Among them were shopkeepers Harlow had extorted, farmers he'd driven from their land, women whose husbands had disappeared after opposing him. "Tomorrow at noon," Jake announced, "you'll stand in the town square, the same place you planned to humiliate Sarah Williams. But instead of cutting her hair, we'll read the charges against you before escorting you to Fort Smith for trial." Harlow's face contorted with rage. "You think a badge makes you untouchable? I've killed lawmen before, left them rotting in shallow graves where no one ever found them." Jake leaned closer, his voice for Harlow alone. "I know exactly what you've done. To my sister at Campbell's Ridge, to Sarah's father, to Reed. I don't care about the badge or the trial." His eyes were cold as gunmetal. "I'm just giving you one thing those people never got. One last night to make peace with your maker." The square of Redemption Creek was packed by noon the next day. Word had spread throughout the county, drawing spectators from neighboring settlements. At the center stood a wooden platform, the same one Harlow had built for Sarah's humiliation. Jake stood beside it wearing the marshal's badge, his Colt holstered but ready. Sarah waited nearby, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her. The crowd parted as 2 deputized townsmen led Harlow from the jailhouse in chains. The sheriff had lost his arrogance overnight. His face was ashen, his uniform rumpled, but hatred still burned in his eyes as he glared at Jake and Sarah. "Citizens of Redemption Creek," Jake called out, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "For too long, this man has ruled through fear and violence. Today, that ends." He unfolded the documents Sarah had provided, the evidence of Harlow's wartime treachery. As Jake read the charges, the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Many were veterans who had fought and bled, while men like Harlow profited from their sacrifice. "He will be transported to Fort Smith," Jake concluded, "where Judge Parker will ensure justice is—" "Liar!" Harlow suddenly bellowed. lunging forward despite his chains. "This is a personal vendetta. Morgan's sister was a Union spy who deserved what she got." The crowd gasped. Jake's hand moved imperceptibly closer to his weapon. "And I'll tell you something else," Harlow continued desperately. "That gold belongs to the Confederacy. The cause isn't dead. There are powerful men who'll see me free within a week." Sarah stepped forward then, climbing onto the platform to face Harlow directly. The crowd fell silent, watching the small woman confront her tormentor. "My father believed that gold belonged to all Americans," she said, her clear voice carrying across the square. "Not to fuel more hatred, but to heal what the war broke." She reached up and did something no one expected. She cut a lock of her own hair with a small knife and let it fall at Harlow's feet. "You thought taking my hair would break my spirit," she said, "but our dignity isn't in what you can take from us. It's in what you can never touch. Our courage to stand against men like you." Something changed in the crowd's mood. Women who had lived in fear under Harlow's rule stepped forward, each cutting a lock of their own hair. Men removed their hats in respect. Even former Confederate soldiers in the crowd nodded their approval. In that moment, whatever remaining support Harlow might have had evaporated. He knew it too. With a roar of desperation, he broke free from his surprised guards, snatching a hidden derringer from his boot. Time slowed to a crawl. The small pistol rose, aiming not at Jake but at Sarah. Jake's hand moved with the precision of a lifetime on the frontier. His Colt cleared leather, fired, and found its mark before most onlookers registered the threat. Harlow collapsed, the derringer falling unfired from his hand. From his pocket spilled a gold locket, the same one Jake's sister had worn in the photograph he carried. Justice had come to Redemption Creek. 6 months later, Jake Morgan stood on the porch of the newly constructed ranger station at the edge of town. Under his supervision, Redemption Creek had transformed. The gold had been recovered and properly surrendered to the Treasury. A new town council governed fairly. Sarah had established a school that welcomed children of all backgrounds. "Heading out again?" Sarah asked, joining him on the porch. Her hair had grown back where she'd cut it that day in the square. The school bell hung silent behind her on this Sunday morning. "Marshal Collins wired from Fort Smith," Jake replied, checking his saddlebags. "Trouble down near the border. Former Confederate officers running guns to Mexican rebels." Sarah nodded, understanding what drove him. There would always be another Harlow, another wrong to right. That was Jake Morgan's purpose. "I'll be back before winter," he promised. No declarations of love passed between them. Their bond had been forged in fire and blood. Something deeper than romance, more enduring than passion. They had given each other something precious. She had given him closure, and he had given her justice. Jake mounted his horse, the morning sun glinting off the badge he'd finally accepted as his own. Redemption had been found, not just for a town, but for a man who had carried ghosts for too long. "The children will miss their shooting lessons," Sarah said with a small smile. Jake tipped his hat. "Tell them to keep practicing. Life on the frontier forgives many things. Poor aim isn't one of them." He turned his horse southward, toward new horizons and old demons. Behind him, the church bells of Redemption Creek began to ring, calling its citizens to prayer in a town that had rediscovered its soul.